Ethan Caldwell was not your average guy. He was a billionaire, but his life wasn't exactly the stuff of fairy tales. Sure, he had more money than most people could dream of, but happiness? That was something else entirely. At 45 years old, Ethan lived alone in a massive penthouse overlooking Manhattan. The view from his floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, skyscrapers glittering like stars, but it did little to fill the emptiness inside him. His days were consumed by meetings, deals, and endless phone calls. Work had been his whole life, for as long as he could remember. Relationships came and went, none lasting long enough to leave a mark. People often described him as cold, distant, even intimidating. But deep down, Ethan wasn't trying to push others away. He just didn't know how to let them in. One evening, Ethan found himself at a charity gala hosted by St. Mary's Orphanage. It wasn't the kind of event he usually attended, but one of his business partners had convinced him to make an appearance. "It'll be good PR," they said. So there he was, dressed in a sharp suit, sipping champagne while pretending to listen to speeches about giving back to the community. But then something happened that caught his attention. A group of kids took the stage to perform a song. They weren't professional singers or actors. They were just ordinary children with big dreams and hopeful smiles. As they sang, Ethan felt a strange tug in his chest. Maybe it was the innocence in their voices or the way they looked out at the crowd, searching for someone who might care. Whatever it was, it hit him harder than he expected. After the performance, Ethan wandered over to where some of the kids were standing. Among them were 3 siblings, 2 energetic 10-year-olds who seemed inseparable, and their older sister, who watched over them protectively. The twins bounced around, laughing and talking nonstop, while the older girl stood quietly, observing everything with sharp eyes. Curiosity got the better of Ethan, and he struck up a conversation. The twins introduced themselves as Mia and Max, full of energy and mischief. Their older sister, Lily, was quieter but clearly the glue holding them together. She spoke politely, answering his questions with a maturity beyond her 13 years. As Ethan talked to them, he learned bits and pieces of their story. They'd been abandoned at birth and spent years bouncing between foster homes. No one wanted to take all 3 of them together, so they'd stayed in the orphanage longer than most kids. Despite their tough start, they radiated resilience, finding joy in small things and sticking close to each other. Something about their bond reminded Ethan of his own childhood. Growing up, he'd always wished for a sibling, someone to share the loneliness with, but it never happened. Watching these 3 interact made him realize how much he admired their connection. They didn't have much, yet they had each other. And somehow, that felt more valuable than anything money could buy. By the end of the night, Ethan surprised everyone, including himself, by announcing his decision to adopt the siblings. The room fell silent, followed by murmurs of disbelief. Even the children stared at him wide-eyed, unsure if they'd heard correctly. For Ethan, it was an impulse, a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Something about these kids called out to him, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. The paperwork took months to finalize, but eventually, Mia, Max, and Lily moved into Ethan's penthouse. At first, adjusting to their new luxurious lifestyle was overwhelming. Fancy furniture replaced bunk beds, gourmet meals replaced cafeteria trays, and private tutors replaced crowded classrooms. Yet through it all, the kids remained grounded, reminding Ethan daily of their strength and spirit. Little did Ethan know, this decision would change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. These weren't just any orphans, they carried secrets buried deep in his past. Secrets that would force him to confront truths he'd long avoided and open doors to a future he never thought possible. Ethan's life changed completely once the kids moved in. At first, it felt like stepping into uncharted territory. He had no idea how to be a dad, let alone to 3 lively children who came with their own quirks and personalities. But as days turned into weeks, he began noticing things about them that fascinated him. Things he couldn't quite explain. Mia, one of the twins, had this habit of tilting her head when she was lost in thought. Her piercing blue eyes reminded Ethan so much of his own reflection in the mirror that it made him pause sometimes. Max, her brother, was a whirlwind of energy, always running around, asking questions and solving puzzles faster than Ethan could keep up. And then there was Lily, the oldest, who carried herself with a quiet confidence. She seemed wise beyond her years, always watching, always observing, like she knew something the rest of them didn't. One afternoon, while sitting at the dining table, Mia looked up from her coloring book and asked innocently, "Why do we look like you?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He froze mid-bite, the fork hovering halfway to his mouth. For a moment, all he could hear was the clinking of silverware against plates as the room fell silent. "What do you mean?" he finally managed to ask, trying to sound casual. Mia shrugged, pointing at her face. "Our eyes, they're the same color as yours." Max chimed in immediately, nodding enthusiastically. "Yeah, and my hair is kinda like yours too." He tugged at his dark locks for emphasis. Lily, who had been quietly sipping her juice, set her glass down and glanced at Ethan. There was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze, but also something else, something guarded. It was almost as if she already knew the answer, but wasn't sure whether to say it out loud. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The kid's words replayed in his mind over and over again. Could it be possible? Was there more to their resemblance than mere coincidence? He tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling that he needed answers. The next morning, Ethan called a private investigator, a man named Roger, someone he'd worked with before on business matters. When Roger arrived at the penthouse, Ethan wasted no time getting straight to the point. "I need you to find out everything you can about these kids," Ethan said, handing over the adoption papers. "Start with their birth records. I want to know who their parents are." Roger raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. He nodded and promised to get back to Ethan within a few weeks. In the meantime, Ethan tried to focus on his new role as a father. He took the kids to museums, parks, and even taught them how to play chess. Every outing brought new surprises. Max's competitive streak shone during board games, while Mia's creativity amazed him with every painting she created. Lily, however, remained a mystery. She rarely spoke about her past, and whenever Ethan brought it up, she'd quickly change the subject. It wasn't until one rainy afternoon that Ethan stumbled upon something that deepened the mystery. While tidying up Lily's room, he noticed a small leather-bound journal tucked under her mattress. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it carefully. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting entries detailing memories, dreams, and snippets of conversations. One passage stood out. Asterisk. "Mom always told us our dad was a hero who didn't know about us. She said he saved lives but didn't realize he'd saved ours too. Someday he'll find us and we'll have a real family." Asterisk. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A hero? Saved lives? None of it made sense. Who was this woman, their mother, and what did she mean by saving lives? Before he could read further, footsteps echoed outside the door. Quickly, he closed the journal and placed it back where he'd found it. A week later, Roger returned with news that left Ethan reeling. According to DNA tests conducted secretly through medical records, Ethan was the biological father of all 3 children. The revelation hit him like a ton of bricks. How could this be possible? He'd never even met their mother, or had he? As Roger explained, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Their mother had placed the kids in the orphanage shortly after their births, leaving behind only a cryptic note. Asterisk, I can't raise them alone." But the most shocking detail came last. Their mother had saved Ethan's life years ago during a car accident, an incident he barely remembered due to amnesia caused by the crash. Ethan sat stunned, his mind racing. All this time, he'd thought the kids were strangers, orphans he'd taken in out of pity. But they weren't strangers at all. They were his flesh and blood, his children. And the woman who gave them life had risked hers to save his. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name: guilt, wonder, and maybe even hope. He realized now why Lily had seemed so guarded. She must have known the truth all along, protecting her siblings and waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Meanwhile, Mia and Max, oblivious to the weight of the secret, continued to brighten his days with their laughter and endless curiosity. But one question loomed larger than the rest. Who was their mother? Why had she kept them apart? And why had she disappeared without a trace? Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan vowed to find her, not just for himself, but for the sake of the family he was only beginning to understand. Ethan's mind was a whirlwind after learning the truth. The revelation that he was the biological father of the 3 kids shook him to his core. But what haunted him most was the woman, their mother. Who was she? How had she saved his life? And why had she vanished without a word? These questions consumed him day and night. He couldn't stop thinking about her, not just because of what she'd done for him, but because she held the key to understanding the family he never knew he had. The private investigator, Roger, handed Ethan a thick folder filled with details about the woman. Her name wasn't mentioned anywhere. She seemed to have erased herself completely, but there were fragments of her story scattered throughout old records. She had been a nurse at the hospital where Ethan recovered from the car accident years ago. That much was clear. What wasn't clear was why she disappeared so suddenly after leaving the kids in the orphanage. Ethan pored over the documents late into the night, piecing together what little information he had. The more he read, the more he admired her strength. She must have gone through hell raising 3 kids on her own, working long hours while trying to give them the best life she could. And yet, despite all that, she still managed to place them in an orphanage, not because she didn't love them, but because she believed they deserved better than what she could offer. As Ethan delved deeper, he found himself drawn to one particular detail: the car accident. It was a foggy memory for him, blurred by time and trauma. All he could recall was waking up in a hospital bed, disoriented and confused, with no recollection of how he got there. Doctors told him he was lucky to be alive, but they never explained why he was lucky. Now, thanks to Roger's findings, the pieces started coming together. According to witness reports, a young woman had pulled Ethan out of his overturned car moments before it burst into flames. She risked her own life to save his, even though they were complete strangers. Afterward, she stayed by his side at the hospital until he regained consciousness. Then, without a word, she disappeared. Ethan stared at the grainy photo. Roger had dug up a security camera image from the hospital hallway. The woman stood in profile, her face partially obscured by shadows. Still, something about her posture felt familiar, as if he'd seen her somewhere before. But where? Determined to find her, Ethan hired Roger to track her down again. This time, he gave him carte blanche. Money was no object. He wanted answers, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks, and just when Ethan began to lose hope, Roger called with news. She'd been found. She lived in a small coastal town, far removed from the chaos of city life. Running a modest cafe, she kept to herself, blending seamlessly into the quiet rhythm of the community. When Ethan arrived in town, his heart pounding with anticipation. For years, he'd built walls around himself, shutting people out. But now, standing on the cusp of meeting the woman who saved his life, and who was also the mother of his children, he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in decades. The cafe was tucked away on a narrow street lined with colorful storefronts. Inside, the air smelled of freshly baked bread and coffee. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a woman behind the counter. She wore a simple apron, her hands busy wiping down tables. At first glance, she looked ordinary, just another hard-working person trying to make ends meet. But as she turned to greet him, their eyes met and everything changed. Recognition flickered in her gaze, followed by shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of conversation faded into the background as Ethan took a step closer. "Do you remember me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "How could I forget?" Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Ethan noticed the lines etched around her eyes, the weariness in her smile. Life hadn't been kind to her, but there was still a spark of resilience. In her expression, a quiet determination that reminded him of Lily. "I know about the kids," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "I adopted them. They're with me now." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Are they okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are they happy?" "They're amazing," Ethan replied, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "They're smart, funny, strong. Just like you." For the first time since walking into the cafe, she smiled a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "That's all I ever wanted for them," she said softly, "to be happy." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down, inviting her to join him. As they talked, the full weight of her sacrifice became clear. She'd given up everything for the sake of her children, even severing ties with the man who unknowingly shared their lives. Fear had driven her decisions, not fear of him, but fear of burdening him with responsibilities she thought he wouldn't want. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Leaving them, letting go. It nearly destroyed me. But I knew they deserved better. You deserved better." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You were wrong," he said firmly. "They deserve you. And so do I." The admission caught her off guard. For years she'd carried the guilt of abandoning her kids, believing she'd made the right choice even as it tore her apart. Hearing Ethan say those words of forgiveness and acceptance, was almost too much to bear. By the end of their conversation, Ethan realized this wasn't just about finding answers or making amends. It was about rebuilding something broken, creating a future where none of them had to carry the weight of the past alone. Together, they decided to tell the kids the truth, not all at once, but gently, allowing them to process the enormity of it all. When Ethan returned home, he gathered Mia, Max, and Lily in the living room. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, they listened intently as he explained everything. Tears streamed down Lily's face as she realized the woman she'd written about in her journal, the hero who'd sacrificed so much, was finally within reach. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with the woman who saved his life and the children who brought meaning to it, he knew anything was possible. The reunion between Ethan and the woman who saved his life, and who was also the mother of his children, was emotional, raw, and filled with moments that neither of them would ever forget. When Ethan told Mia, Max, and Lily about their mom being alive and how she had given them up out of love, the kids were overwhelmed. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to excitement to tears. But one thing was clear. They wanted to meet her. Ethan arranged for the four of them to visit the coastal town where she lived. The journey there felt surreal. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't focused on work or deadlines. Instead, his mind was consumed by thoughts of what lay ahead. He glanced at the kids in the car, Mia staring out the window, Max fidgeting with a toy car and Lily clutching her journal tightly. Each of them carried their own mix of emotions, but there was an undeniable sense of hope in the air. When they arrived at the cafe, the kids hesitated outside. Ethan knelt down to their level, placing a reassuring hand on each of their shoulders. "She's waited a long time to see you," he said softly, "and so have you." Lily nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's go," she whispered, gripping her siblings' hands. Together they stepped inside. The moment she saw them, the woman froze behind the counter. Her eyes widened as tears spilled down her cheeks. She dropped the dish towel she'd been holding and rushed toward them, her arms open wide. The kids didn't hesitate. They ran straight into her embrace, hugging her as if they'd known her all along. Even Lily, who usually kept her emotions locked away, broke down, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Ethan stood back, watching the scene unfold. It was bittersweet, seeing the family he never knew he had come together like this. There was pain in the room, the weight of years lost, but there was also joy, forgiveness, and love. After a while, the woman ushered everyone to sit down at a corner table. Over cups of hot chocolate and plates of freshly baked cookies, they began to talk. At first, it was awkward. The kids peppered her with questions. Asterisk, why did you leave us? Did you miss us? Why didn't you tell Dad about us? She answered honestly, explaining how hard it had been to raise them alone, and why she thought giving them up was the best decision she could make at the time. "I didn't know your dad back then," she said, glancing at Ethan. "I only knew he was a good man because I saw him risk his life to help others. After the accident, when I realized who you were, I thought, maybe someday fate would bring us together again." Her words struck a chord with Ethan. He had spent years building walls around himself, focusing solely on success and material wealth. But now, sitting here with his children and the woman who had saved him, he understood that true fulfillment came from connection, not accomplishments. As the conversation continued, the kids started sharing stories about their lives. Mia talked excitedly about her love for painting, showing off sketches she'd brought along. Max bragged about winning a school science fair, pulling out a tiny trophy from his backpack. And Lily read aloud from her journal, recounting memories of growing up in foster homes and dreaming of finding their parents someday. Listening to them, the woman smiled through her tears. "You're all so incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you'd grow up to be amazing people." Over the next few days, Ethan and the kids stayed in the coastal town, getting to know her better. They explored the beaches, visited local markets, and even helped out at the cafe. Slowly, the cracks in their fractured family began to mend. Ethan noticed how natural it felt to share responsibilities with her, whether it was cooking meals or tucking the kids into bed at night. For the first time in years, he felt like part of something bigger than himself, but healing wasn't easy. One evening, after the kids had gone to sleep, Ethan and the woman sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The silence between them was comfortable, yet heavy with unspoken truths. "I'm sorry," she said finally, breaking the quiet, "for everything. For leaving you in that hospital without saying goodbye. For not telling you about the kids. I was scared, Ethan, scared of ruining your life." He shook his head, reaching for her hand. "Don't apologize. You did what you thought was right. And look at them, they turned out perfect. That's all thanks to you." She smiled faintly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "They're strong, just like you." The days turned into weeks, and eventually it was time to return to the city. Saying goodbye to the peaceful little town wasn't easy, but they all agreed it was just the beginning of their new chapter. Back in Manhattan, Ethan made changes to his life that surprised everyone, including himself. First, he stepped down as CEO of his company, handing over the reins to trusted colleagues. Money and power no longer held the same appeal. Instead, he wanted to focus on building a real family. With her encouragement, he started using his resources to give back to the community. He funded programs for single parents, opened shelters for homeless families, and created scholarships for underprivileged kids. Every decision he made was inspired by the sacrifices she had made and the resilience of their children. Meanwhile, the kids thrived in their new environment. Mia's artwork gained recognition, earning her a spot in a prestigious art competition. Max became the youngest member of a robotics club, impressing everyone with his creativity and problem-solving skills. And Lily poured her heart into writing, eventually publishing a memoir titled Finding Home. The book chronicled their journey from abandonment and loss to rediscovery and love. It touched countless hearts and became a bestseller, further cementing her dream of becoming a writer. Through it all, the bond between Ethan, the woman, and the kids grew stronger. They laughed together, argued occasionally, and supported one another through every challenge. Family dinners became sacred traditions filled with laughter, storytelling, and sometimes tears. Holidays were celebrated with more joy than ever before as they embraced the second chance they'd been given. One evening, as they gathered around the fireplace, Ethan looked at the three faces that had changed his life forever. "You know," he said, his voice warm with gratitude, "I used to think wealth was measured in dollars. But now I know it's measured in moments like these with the people who matter most." The woman smiled, squeezing his hand. "We've got a lot of those moments ahead of us," and she was right. Together, they had built a future rooted in love, forgiveness, and hope, a future none of them could have imagined, but one that felt exactly right. Life had taken an unexpected turn for Ethan and his newly reunited family. What started as a lonely existence in a penthouse overlooking Manhattan had transformed into something far richer, a home filled with laughter, love, and the kind of chaos that only a close-knit family could bring. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge they faced together made their bond stronger. The woman who saved Ethan's life, now a central figure in his world, brought warmth and purpose to their household. She wasn't just the kid's mom anymore. She was also Ethan's partner in every sense of the word. Together, they navigated the ups and downs of parenting three spirited children while rediscovering themselves along the way. For her, it meant letting go of years of guilt and fear. For Ethan, it meant learning how to be vulnerable again after decades of shutting people out. Their days were no longer about boardroom meetings or chasing profits. Instead, they revolved around school plays, science fairs, and bedtime stories. Mia's art studio became a colorful corner of the house where paint splatters decorated the walls and creativity flowed freely. Max turned the living room into a makeshift robotics lab, building gadgets that often beeped and whirred late into the night. And Lily spent hours curled up on the couch, penning chapters for her next book, inspired by their incredible story. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Ethan himself. The man who once prided himself on being untouchable now wore his heart on his sleeve. He attended every soccer game, cheered at every piano recital, and even learned how to braid Mia's hair when she asked him to help with her dance performances. His transformation didn't go unnoticed. Friends and colleagues marveled at how different he seemed, kinder, more patient, and genuinely happy. One day, during a family dinner, Lily brought up a question that had been on everyone's mind. "Are we going to stay here forever?" she asked, glancing between her parents. "Or are we going to move somewhere else?" Ethan exchanged a look with the woman before answering. "We've talked about it," he said thoughtfully. "This place has been great, but maybe it's time for a fresh start. Somewhere quieter, where we can all grow together." The idea sparked excitement among the kids. They spent weeks brainstorming what their dream home would look like. Mia envisioned a garden full of flowers, Max wanted a treehouse big enough for sleepovers, and Lily hoped for a cozy library with oversized chairs. In the end, they found a property nestled in the countryside, a sprawling farmhouse surrounded by rolling hills and endless skies. It was perfect. Moving day arrived, and the entire family pitched in to make the transition smooth. Boxes were packed, furniture was rearranged, and memories were created with every step. On their first night in the new house, they gathered around a bonfire in the backyard, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under the stars. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful, a chapter they would write together. As months passed, Ethan continued to use his wealth to create opportunities for others. Inspired by the sacrifices their mother had made, he launched a foundation dedicated to supporting single parents and children in need. Scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship programs became pillars of his mission. He often invited the kids to join him at events, teaching them the importance of giving back and making a difference in the world. Mia, Max, and Lily embraced these lessons wholeheartedly. Mia used her artistic talents to design murals for community centers, brightening spaces with vibrant colors. Max organized workshops for kids interested in STEM, showing them how fun and accessible science could be. And Lily traveled to schools, speaking about resilience and the power of storytelling. Her memoir, Finding Home, remained a beacon of hope for families facing similar struggles. Despite their busy schedules, the family always found time to reconnect. Weekends were reserved for hikes, picnics, and spontaneous road trips. Holidays were celebrated with homemade meals, laughter, and sometimes tears-happy ones, of course. Even arguments became moments of growth, as they learned to communicate openly and support one another through thick and thin. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan stood on the porch watching the kids play in the yard. Mia chased butterflies with a net, Max tested a new drone invention, and Lily sat cross-legged on the grass, scribbling notes in her journal. The woman joined him, leaning against the railing with a content smile. "They're amazing," she said softly, nodding toward the kids. "I still can't believe this is our life." Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Me neither," he admitted. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." She tilted her head to look at him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't saved you that night? If we'd never crossed paths?" He thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "No point wondering. All that matters is we're here now with them. That's all that counts." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled. "You're right. This is exactly where we're supposed to be." Years later, when the kids grew older and began forging their own paths, the farmhouse remained a sanctuary for the entire family. Mia pursued a career in art therapy, using her talent to heal others. Max became an engineer, designing innovative solutions to real-world problems. And Lily published several more books, becoming a voice for those who felt lost or forgotten. Through it all, Ethan and the woman stayed by each other's side, weathering life's challenges with unwavering support. Their love story was unconventional, born out of sacrifice and redemption, but it was theirs a testament to the power of forgiveness, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Looking back, Ethan realized he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along: not wealth or success, but connection. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions. It was measured in moments shared with the people who mattered most. And sitting on the porch with his family, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, he knew he was the richest man alive.